Left-wing activists accidentally are causing mass child starvation, the worst argument for sending billions more to Ukraine, and perhaps the cringiest male feminist TikTok of all time. All that and so much more is coming up on today's episode of Brad vs. Everyone, my new daily series where I cover the craziest things on the internet and in our politics from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around. And if you're returning, don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your thoughts. I do read the comments and I respond to a few of them in every episode. Now, without further ado, let's check in on international left-wing activists and the good stuff they're getting up to. The left-wing activist organization Greenpeace just won big in court, and now countless more children will starve and have malnutrition as a result. Woohoo! I know it sounds like I'm being hyperbolic, but I'm really not. We've got reporting here from Reason. Greenpeace crusade will blind and kill children. Greenpeace and other anti-tech biotech activist groups have logged a win in a crusade that could ultimately blind and kill thousands of children annually. How? By persuading the Court of Appeals of the Philippines to issue a scientifically ignorant and morally hideous decision to ban the planting of vitamin A enriched golden rice. The objective result will be more children blinded and killed by vitamin A deficiency. The World Health Organization estimates that 250,000 to 500,000 children who are vitamin A deficient become blind every year, and half of them die within 12 months of losing their sight. In addition, children with immune systems weakened by vitamin A deficiency have an increased risk of illness and death from infectious diseases. Of course, Greenpeace celebrated this ruling that puts these big restrictions on GMOs, genetically modified food, basically, in a press release. They called it a people's win against genetically modified rice. This decision is a monumental win for Filipino farmers and Filipino people who have for decades stood up against genetically modified crops. Greenpeace commends this decision and is honored to be part of the movement that supported this work, spearheaded by Filipino farmers who will ultimately benefit the most from the decision. In this decision, the Court of Appeals has essentially put a moratorium on these genetically modified crops, and in doing so, the CA has upheld the constitutional rights of Filipinos and the government's duty to serve the interests of the people rather than that of agro-technical companies. Significantly, the decision firmly upholds the precautionary principle and puts the burden of proof for safety on the respondents. Genetically modified crops have never been proven safe and have hindered necessary progress on climate-resilient ecological agriculture that keeps the control of seeds on our farmers. It's kind of wild to see these activists celebrating like they've just done something amazing, when what they've actually done is get courts to block a new technological innovation and food that could have saved countless lives and saved thousands and thousands of children's eyesight too. Despite what Greenpeace claims, there are studies showing that bioengineered rice is perfectly safe to eat, and regulators across the world have reached this conclusion. As Ronald Bailey points out, the court's decision is morally hideous because it blocks the safe and efficient delivery of this sorely needed nutrient to vitamin A deficient Filipino children whose diets are heavily dependent on rice. Nearly 17% of Filipino children between 6 to 59 months old are vitamin A deficient. You don't have to take my word for it, though, that what Greenpeace is doing here is crazy and anti-science. A group of more than 100 Nobel Prize winners wrote a letter denouncing Greenpeace's campaign against the genetically modified rice and calling it a crime against humanity. I completely agree, and again, I just wish that all these activist groups would please stop helping. I also want to tell you guys a little bit more about something that Greenpeace mentioned here, which is called the precautionary principle. According to the Mercatus Center, the precautionary principle refers to the idea that public policies should limit innovations until their creators can prove they will not cause any potential harms or disruptions. When there's uncertainty about future risks, the precautionary principle defaults to play it safe mode by disallowing trial and error progress, or at least making it far more difficult. This is the boneheaded principle that many environmental activists, not just Greenpeace and not just in the Philippines, want to apply to public policy more broadly. And of course, there are some instances where it makes sense to take an abundance of caution when there is reason to believe there could be consequences with a technology or a product that could be extremely harmful. In those cases, I think it's fair to say, you've got to comprehensively prove that this is safe before you can be allowed to put it on the market. But when there's no reason to believe that there actually is any reason something would be unsafe, and when it could address a problem that would literally save hundreds of thousands of lives, still clinging to this abundance of caution principle makes no sense at all. I think you should just make sure it's labeled, right? So that people know they're getting genetically modified food. And if they don't want that, they can buy other options, but then let it out into the world. And if there is some huge safety problem that emerges, though there's no reason to think that, and studies so far haven't shown anything, then yeah, maybe you make some rules or something, but don't preemptively block progress because of hypothetical harms that you really have no reason to believe even exist. And enshrining the status quo, which is what these activists are ironically doing, is actively reinforcing a situation that will cause children to lose their lives. Come on, guys, come on. I got a lot of comments on this from when I talked about AI, and I just want to encourage you guys again to not fall into the trap of technophobia. Just because stuff is new and innovative and on the cutting edge of technology doesn't mean that it's bad or scary or harmful. It could be, but don't jump to that conclusion. You can go back through history and find dire warnings in the New York Times that everything from the radio to the television to the cell phone would destroy society, ruin our country as we know it. None of it came true. Humans have a natural tendency to fear technology, and that's okay, but we can't let that fear bind our hands into these overcautious, restrictive approaches to technology that block innovation and ultimately cost people their lives. But what do you think? Do you agree with the court's decision? And would you personally eat some genetically modified rice? Personally, I absolutely would, but I want to hear from you guys. Don't forget to hit that like button. And now let's talk about Ukraine. So you might remember that just last week, the federal government passed an additional $61 billion in aid for Ukraine in its war against Russia's invasion. This includes nearly $14 billion for weapons purchases and roughly $9 billion in economic assistance in forgivable loans. Don't count on those loans being paid back, guys. This comes on top of roughly $74 billion that we've already sent them. When you add it all up, it comes out to about $950 per federal taxpayer that we've directly or indirectly sent to Ukraine in the form of weapons or economic aid or what have you. This has sparked a lot of debate, especially on the right, where you have two camps, one kind of a more internationalist establishment camp that thinks protecting Ukraine from Russia and halting Putin's aggression is in the US's vital national interest. And in another camp, you have the America First type Republicans who want to focus on our own border and our own country and the fact that Americans can't afford groceries and gas and don't think we have $135 billion to be sending to a country halfway across the world. Personally, my sympathies lie with the latter camp, but I can definitely see arguments on both sides. However, there's one argument that the pro-Ukraine aid camp keeps making that's driving me slightly insane. Essentially, they're arguing that spending this money on sending it to Ukraine is actually good for America because it will create jobs in the defense industry here in the US. Here's Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell making exactly that point.
In this episode, more of my members really focused on the facts. And it's hard to argue against the supplemental. It's in our interest. This is not charity to Ukraine. It's in our interest. And I think we've sort of refocused on the importance of playing the kind of role that we need to play in the world. It's in our interest. None of this is charity. The whole democratic world is in favor of what we did this week. That should get the attention of our members. Plus, all the jobs that are being created in their states with the money that we're spending retooling our industrial base for the big challenges ahead against.
Democrats like Congressman Eric Swalwell have made pretty much the same argument. He wrote an op-ed in MSNBC that said helping Ukraine isn't just good for Ukraine, it's good for our economy. In this article, he pointed out that 57% of the emergency aid previously approved for Ukraine was actually spent here right here at home. Essentially, he argues that this taxpayer money is then spent and it creates jobs in America for people working for weapons manufacturers, for example. And so therefore, it's definitely in our interest to spend all this money on a foreign conflict, despite the fact that Ukraine has one of the most corrupt governments in the world historically. But anyway, this argument that it's good for the US because this money is being spent in the defense industry here inside our borders is one of the most frustrating economic arguments I've heard in some time. It's normal to hear that kind of take from progressives, who tend to think that the government has a magical horn of plenty and can conjure resources out of thin air. But conservatives and Republicans are supposed to be the ones that understand basic economics and know that opportunity cost exists. You can't just look at whatever jobs are created by this spending in a vacuum, as if that's the only change or the only impact that this will have. Yes, there are some presumably decent paying jobs in weapons manufacturing in Texas or Pennsylvania or wherever you may want to talk about that will be created because of this spending. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. And that's money that could have been invested into building schools or highways or bridges or doing something else that would have also created jobs. And if it hadn't been spent by the federal government at all, it would have been spent somewhere in the private sector, spent by taxpayers at restaurants in their community or by businesses investing in new storefronts and creating new jobs. So with this aid, you haven't created new jobs. You haven't stimulated the US economy. You've moved it from where the money would have flown naturally to instead be spent in weapons manufacturing, which is great for defense contractors who are extraordinarily well politically connected, but doesn't actually help the American economy on net at all. So we can and should continue to have a robust debate about what the best US policy towards Ukraine is. And I have all the sympathy in the world for the Ukrainian people, given the unjustified invasion by Putin. But we can't use economically illiterate, toddler-level economic arguments to justify spending hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars. Come on, guys. We can do better than that. We can have a better, more serious debate than that. But what do you guys think? Do you support the government sending $135 billion to Ukraine? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like button. Now, up next, it's time for DELULU Epidemic, my segment where I spotlight people who are letting their stupid show. Today, this woman's take on marriage is genuinely bizarre. So Pearl Davis, who's an anti-feminist YouTuber, tweeted, "Men saying, 'let me ask my wife,' is like women saying, 'let me ask my child.'" I mean, I do think it would be cringe if a man had to ask his wife about every single little thing, but if it's something important, if it's about their schedule, if it's about their finances, if it's a meaningful decision, then of course they should talk to their wife because it's supposed to be an equal partnership. And women aren't comparable to children. Men and women are different, of course, but a marriage is supposed to be an equal partnership, a team, not similar to a parent-child dynamic. Again, Pearl has all these thoughts about marriage and long-term relationships and dating, but hasn't been married, it doesn't have long-term relationship experience, and doesn't seem to be making progress on that front. So it's really unclear to me why anyone would take her advice. It actually got worse, though. A person said, actually, it's more like saying, hey, I have to make a responsible conversation with another adult to make this decision. I'm not a mind reader, and I don't have an answer for you right now because I married another adult whose input I value, not a toy who has to go along with every whim that I may not have even thought through all the way. She replied, women aren't mentally adult. Huh? They actually are, but okay? And here's the thing that bothers me about these anti-feminist people who go too far beyond just critiquing feminism and, woke excesses and just are anti-woman. By your own logic, if women aren't mentally adults, why should anybody listen to anything you have to say? Pearl Davis, just pearly things. Your DELULU is showing. Alright guys, now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my segment where I take on the craziest and cringiest ideas from the Clock app. Don't forget to hit that like button, comment with your thoughts, and let me know what you think of this as we go along, and maybe even consider subscribing. Now let's check this out, because this might just be the cringiest male feminist TikTok of all time.
Anyway, that's my favorite form of microfeminism. What's yours?
All right, I don't know how much space I'm allowed to occupy in this conversation, but I want to contribute. Playdates. I make it a point to schedule as much playdate time as possible. A lot of times I'm dealing with moms of other children. But I force the dads to be involved. I'll text them first. I'll email them first. If I run into them, I say, hey, here's my number. Let's set something up for our kids. It's kind of a running joke a little bit, but at least it's being noticed. So that's good. And then also anytime you're being told a story or someone recounts an article or something that happened and doesn't identify a gender of the main character of that story, like, oh, hey, did you see that drunk driver crash into the hospital? Oh my God. What was his name? Did you hear about that firefighter that saved 3 kids? Oh my God. She sounds incredible. That's great. Good for her.
Ugh, there's so much cringe to unpack here. So first, we have to talk about the fact that he put a trigger warning on the video that a male was about to speak. Are you serious, bro? How much space am I allowed to occupy in this conversation? It's your TikTok page. You can talk about whatever you want, and if people don't want to listen, they'll just keep swiping. You don't have to apologize for your gender or sex or act like it makes you less capable or less able to participate in a conversation or debate. And look, I think the thing about the playdates is relatively harmless. I mean, dads should be involved in their kids' lives, and while what you're doing might be making things a little more inefficient, I don't really see anything wrong with it. But I have to say, the thing about the purposeful gendering of a firefighter as female is incredibly dumb because A, that kind of thing really doesn't accomplish anything, but B, you're just like basically trampling on factual reality in pursuit of microfeminism. It's just a fact that 95% of firefighters are men. So if you're just being logical and you don't know the gender of a firefighter, it would make sense to assume it's a dude. Now, maybe in situations where it's 50-50 in a field, you shouldn't just assume it's a man and use he. Although again, don't really think it's that big a deal, but maybe in those cases he might have a point. When you're actually stretching yourself so hard to virtue signal what a good male feminist you are, that you are purposefully making yourself almost certainly inaccurate in your speech, you've gone too far, babe. And I say this all as somebody who I guess kind of is a male feminist. I am male and I am a feminist, at least not in the woke sense, right? I think modern feminism has gone kind of crazy, but in the sense that I don't really believe in most gender roles or sex stereotypes. And I think women should absolutely be equal under the law and given the same opportunities as men. Yet even I find this incredibly cringe. But apparently a lot of people liked it because he posted a part 2.
Anyway, that's my favorite form of microfeminism. What's yours?
So with your permission, I would like a little bit more space in the conversation. I've got coffee, I've got notes, and let's get into it. Here are some of my favorite micro-feminisms from the comment queens on my last video. My husband values me out loud, in front of the kids, in front of other people, in public in general. Mom is better at driving. Mom is better at reading. Mom is better at anything. Person hours over man hours. You can do that for any of the mankind, humankind, person kind. There's a bunch of variations of that.
Okay, so again, the apologizing for your sex, like warning, man about to speak. That's just so pathetic. Does this man literally think he's not allowed to speak unless women give him permission? And I think the point about valuing your wife and pointing out when she's better at things, I think that's great. But and sure, do that for women when it's true, but also do it for men. I don't know. I don't see that as super feminist thing. I just kind of see that as being a good husband or a good wife. You should be gassing up your partner and highlighting their strengths and the ways in which they sometimes lead and you sometimes lead. Like, that's all well and good to me. I totally support that. But the stuff about saying person kind and human hours or whatever instead of mankind or man hours or whatever is so dumb. Mankind was never considered a gendered word. It's always referred to males and females, all of humanity. And literally 0 real people have had their lives adversely affected because of that word's phrasing. And getting people to say person kind instead is not just clunky and annoying, but it accomplishes literally 0 to help or advance women or feminism in any way. It shouldn't be called microfeminism. It should be called microscopic virtue signaling. But of course, there's more.
When meeting a new couple, ask mom or the woman what they do for a living first, before you ask the man. Dadder Day, I love this. That's just on a Saturday morning, a bunch of dads and their kids getting together and having play dates. I love that. Texting dad only or addressing dad first in a group text, or even just including them in a group text. All good. Putting a woman's name before a man's name when addressing what would assumedly be a married couple, like John and Jane Smith. This goes out to Jane and John Smith. Having dad as the emergency contact, even if they're the irresponsible one that'll just be like, call the mom. At least you're forcing that man to admit to other people, I'm incapable of dealing with the situation. I need the woman's help.
Okay, so some of these seem innocuous, like dad or day, whatever. That sounds cool, but I also don't really get what it has to do with feminism. And then if people want to address the dad first in a group chat, or if they want to write Jane and John Adams instead of John and Jane Adams, knock yourself out. I don't have any problem with that. I think that's perfectly fine to do. But the emergency contact one kind of threw me for a loop, because it's kind of in the name. Emergency in emergency contact, that this is kind of a serious situation where you really need to get in touch with somebody. So you should be putting whatever parent is going to be the most responsible, most likely to pick up the phone, most likely to be able to assist you in that situation, not purposefully putting a less reliable person as someone's emergency contact in pursuit of micro-feminist virtue signaling. That is not just DELULU, but dangerous. Anyway, he goes on for several more minutes, but I really don't want to put you guys through more of that. What do you think of this whole micro-feminism trend? Do you actually think there's a point to some of it, or is it all just vapid virtue signaling? Look, I'm somebody who supports traditional feminism, at least in the sense of equality between the sexes, but I still find a lot of this woke TikTok stuff dumb, pointless, and cringe. Let me know what you think, though. If you disagree with me, I definitely do want to hear your take. And don't forget to hit that like button to reward me for suffering through TikTok. And maybe if you can consider subscribing and sticking around, or even turning on those bell notifications. Now, I'll read a couple of your comments before we wrap up today's episode. One person said, the title Brad vs. Everyone reminds me of this random show called Adam Ruins Everything, but instead of ruining things more, Brad makes it a little better by letting the rest of us know we haven't lost our marbles for thinking that society has gone off the rails. You know, I didn't think of that when I was coming up with the name, and I've never actually seen Adam Ruins Everything, but that kind of is an interesting comparison. And yeah, I hear from a lot of people who watch my content that they can relate to it, not because they're necessarily in agreement with me on everything or because we have similar life experiences. We often don't, and we often aren't, but just because we both retain a modicum of sanity in an online world that has increasingly come unhinged. Up next, Brad, have you ever seen The Office? I personally can't decide which is my favorite show, The Office or Modern Family. They both are pretty great. Yes, I have seen The Office several times over the years, and I think it's a great show. Haven't seen Modern Family so much, so I'd have to go with The Office by default. But one of the things I love about The Office is how hilariously politically incorrect it is, and I actually think that a lot of the episodes and a lot of the plot lines and the jokes simply couldn't be made today. There would be outrage, there would be cancellations, and all that nonsense. And that's yet more proof of how wokeness kills joy, honestly. Another person wrote, I love you, Brad, but sometimes you are DELULU. Okay, now you just sound like my boyfriend. In all seriousness, though, I don't claim to be omniscient. I don't claim to be perfect. I don't claim to know everything. All I can do is be real with you guys and give you my honest thoughts and opinions. Sometimes you'll disagree. Sometimes I'll get things wrong. Sometimes I'll mess up. Sometimes maybe even I will be a little bit DELULU. But nobody's perfect, I guess. All right, everybody, I'll leave it there for comments for today. Drop yours below and I'll consider reading them on the next episode. And with that, don't forget to hit the like button before you go. Maybe consider subscribing and sticking around. And now, I'll talk to you all tomorrow.